Welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul. My co-host Justin Baker and I getting ready to preview the Western Division, the Honda West Division, excuse me. How dare I not include the free advertisement for Honda. The West Division was not yet decided when we did our playoff preview earlier in the week, and since then, of course, the Colorado Avalanche are now taking on the St. Louis Blues after they won their last two games against the Los Angeles Kings. So once again, my prediction on who will be even playing in this series was wrong. I said that Vegas would end up playing the Blues. It didn't happen. The Vegas Golden Knights are going to take on the surging Minnesota Wild. So we'll preview both those series today. And Justin, as we get started, you did predict Colorado winning those two games. Your thoughts on just how this all shook out?
Well, you know what, actually, I'm not surprised, to be quite honest. I mean, Colorado had to play LA, so that was kind of an easy one to predict, but I figured at least LA would want to play spoiler and
sure,
take a point.
Yeah, exactly. Jerks.
But, hey, I mean, overall, you can't complain. I think, honestly, any one of these four teams probably don't want to face the other four because, at least at the top, you see the top three, Vegas, Colorado, and Minnesota. They were all fairly close in terms of points. And then, of course, there's St. Louis, but they're a team, again, a couple years removed from a Stanley Cup. You can't ever count them out as far as talent goes and experience.
Yeah, it's a good rematch from 20 years ago. We're getting the last time the Blues and the Avalanche met was the 2001 Western Conference Final when Colorado won in 5 games on their way, of course, to Ray Bourque lifting the cup. And that was, one of the few times that the Avalanche won, or that a team won the President's Trophy and won the cup. They did that in that year. So the Avalanche take on the Blues, and it's really, really hard for me to make an initial assessment of this series because the fact that the Blues have had such a weird season, and they were injured most of it, and they of course squeeze into the playoffs here at the end, almost like by default. Like there just weren't very many good teams in this West Division, probably the weakest in terms of what you had to compete with down in the bottom. Like, again, Arizona misses the playoffs by 9 points. I mean, Anaheim was terrible. San Jose was brutal. LA, they had a nice little stretch at one point where it made you go, ooh, they're going to be fun. And yeah, obviously it didn't, nothing panned out for them, but this division had a pretty weak bottom. But this division's very top heavy. I mean, even the Blues finishing in 4th. Down the stretch, 6-1-3. They won their last 3 headed into the playoffs. The Blues are in a great position right now, but at the same time, hey, the Avs 8-2, and they won their last 5. So both these teams coming in on a high, but also I don't really know if we know what St. Louis can bring and what they're going to look like, because they've just been such a strange team this year, and everything's kind of coming together. For the most part, everyone's healthy, aside from, of course, now David Perron is going to miss game 1 due to COVID protocols. But I would expect to see him a little later in the series. But this, you got Ryan O'Reilly saying that they're going to win. So it's going to be a pretty fun series, I think.
Yeah, and let's be honest, Ryan O'Reilly, right? You got to expect him to say, hey, we're going to win. But
do you though? Do you see anybody else predicting that they're going to win their series? You don't even see. You don't even see
just keep their mouth shut, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. You don't see, especially you don't see Brendan Gallagher or Shea Weber saying, "Oh, we're going to beat the Leafs." Like, nobody's making that bold prediction because most of the time you don't make that prediction because you don't want to look like an idiot when you get swept or something. Like, if St. Louis goes out and gets swept, it's going to be like, bro, don't ever say that again. Like, in some ways you're like fueling the fire, right? Like, you're letting the other team know that they legitimately think they can beat you, and you're going to go, oh no, you're not going to beat. Like there is some, like, you're just fueling the more reason to beat you is to make you eat your words. And, hey, predictions have worked out. Mark Messier, of course, predicted that the Rangers would win games 6 and 7 against the New Jersey Devils when they were playing them in the conference finals in 1994. That's really the only like legitimate big prediction that a player has made that really came true. I can't think of too many others in the NHL. I can think of like Rasheed Wallace for the Pistons predicting that they'd win, and of course they did. But it doesn't happen very often. But also, I think we probably forget the idiots that predict stuff and then kind of eat their words. But hey, if anybody can do it, it's Ryan O'Reilly, Conn Smythe Trophy winner. We know that he shows up during the playoffs.
Yeah, I was gonna say he's got the hardware to back it up. Anyways, Colorado does not yet.
Yeah, they don't. But it certainly looks like there's going to be hardware in this team's future in some respects. Like this team isn't gonna just lose in the first round every year. They've been on such a tear. They have a 15-game point streak right now, dating back to, or they had one, and then they have a 17-game home point streak from March 10th to May 13th. Like this team, they're in every game, and that's the big thing. Like, yeah, you're not going to win every game. It's just not going to happen. But Colorado's practically in every single game that they play. And that is what's going to be really hard for the Blues, is that you're almost assuredly going to get one game in this series where the Avalanche's offense just kind of goes ham a bit and probably puts up, a 5 or 6 spot on St. Louis, and it's just going to be a frustrating night. They're going to win 5-2, 6-2, 5-1, something along those lines. And I don't think St. Louis has that type of game in them. Like when they're going to win, they're going to need to win 4 games, maybe by a goal, but definitely 4 games by 2 goals. So everything's going to be much more tight for St. Louis. So there's a much smaller window for error. Whereas for Colorado, I think they can make up a little bit for some mistakes potentially that happened because of their high-flying offense. I mean, they scored 28 more goals than the Blues. They allowed, if you look at their goal differential, they are separated by 65 goals in their goal differential.
That's crazy.
Yeah. I mean, St. Louis was a -1. Colorado's a +64. So that is I think in terms of playoff teams, the only team with a worse goal differential is Montreal with a -9. But in terms of two teams being separated, that is the biggest separation between two teams, as Montreal and the Leafs are about 48 goals apart. So 65 goals apart is by far the biggest goal differential. And I know that's a regular season and it doesn't ultimately matter, but it does show, hey, Colorado can score in bunches. Oh, yeah. And they also barely let in anything.
Right. I will say, if there is one thing working against the Avalanche, right, you look at the President's Trophy. They're the season winners, and the last President's Trophy winner was 2013 to take home the cup.
Chicago.
And the last, and honestly, since the trophy's been awarded since '86, only 8 teams have done it. So,
yeah, but 35 years, 8 teams. So you're looking at, what's that, like
22%?
22%. So 22% of the time, the team that is the number one team wins. There's 15 other teams. So you go and you split that 15, that percentage up between those other ones. And I would expect that they are still the most likely team to win. 22% is pretty good out of 16 teams. So, how we'd have to go, all right, how often does a 2 seed, like the second best team in the playoffs, win? How often does the third best? And I'll bet that it would be less than 22%.
Sure.
So,
yeah.
but it's random. Of course, it's somewhat random and you don't get that. But I mean, I think that you're crazy if you don't tell me that Colorado is the favorite to win the cup in this league. Now they might not win the cup. You might not pick them to win the cup, but top to bottom in their lineup, if Grubauer's healthy, if they have a serviceable goaltender, this is probably the best team in terms of talent and what they can do to you. Doesn't mean they're going to win, because the best team doesn't always win, but in terms of pure talent, I mean, this team is just built to score a bunch and defend pretty darn well, and their goaltender has been excellent this year. Yeah,
well, we'll make our predictions and see who we got here.
Okay, all right. Anything else you want in terms of St. Louis? We know that they have been killed by injury. It's even like Tarasenko comes back and then he misses the final 6 games of the season and 8 of the last 9. I know he didn't even play until March 6th. It's going to be interesting to see if he has anything in the tank for this playoff series. I mean, he did well in the playoffs last year, but I mean, then he got hurt. Like he was all right early on, and he gets hurt. He is, to me, like, St. Louis needs Tarasenko to do something, especially with Perron on the COVID protocol list. Like, I don't know if we'll, maybe he misses a game, maybe he misses 2 games. We're not sure. How do the Blues produce some offense in this series?
I mean, listen, they need, right? You talked about Colorado's high-flying offense, their ability to score goals. And you look at St. Louis, right? Ryan O'Reilly obviously leading the charge with 24 goals, but the next best guy, David Perron at 19, is going to be out. He's the first, player in St. Louis, I don't know in how many years, to finish with at least a point per game pace, but
since Pavel Demitra scored 93 points in 78 games in 2002-2003.
Yes, so it's been a while, but Tarasenko, 24 games, only 4 goals, right? You want to talk about they need a guy who can be a difference maker outside of Ryan O'Reilly, because obviously I think Riley, you're going to see him matched up against McKinnon as much as possible, either him or Braden Shannon. I think, St. Louis can't go wrong with either one of those two centermen trying to defend that high-speed offense line. But, they need Tarasenko to step up and be that secondary scoring when, Ryan O'Reilly's not putting goals in the net. Same goes with Mike Hoffman, right? He was third on the team with 17 goals, but I'd like to see a little bit more out of him, and especially because, he's a UFA. I think maybe you might, see a little bit more urgency for him to score a couple goals. I mean, he's playing for a contract, obviously, in the offseason, so it's going to be fairly important for him to, go out there and show that he's worth a multi-year extension. But more than anything, this team needs some scoring outside of Ryan O'Reilly, and hopefully, if Perron's not out for too long in the series, hopefully they can get it from guys like Tarasenko and Hoffman. But the other concern for me, as far as Colorado and St. Louis goes, I'm concerned as far as Colorado is concerned in the face-off circle, right? I watched last night the Boston and Washington game. Boston just dominated in that circle, and I think Washington managed to get a little lucky and escape there with a win, especially with an injured starting goaltender, Craig Anderson, stepping up to plug the hole there. But St. Louis is a much better team when it comes to the face-off circle, and we know that can create a lot of offensive chances if you're winning draws, especially in the offensive zone, and then it can stifle some chances on the opposite end if you're winning them in the defensive zone. So, can Colorado find a way to at least keep it fairly close as far as face-off win percentages go?
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you can start each time in the zone with the puck, I mean, that's a huge advantage. I will say for St. Louis, something that I'm not sure if it's just the way that they play, or if it's just kind of, hey, this season everything kind of came together for them, and fortunately they were able to get a little lucky. But their shooting percentages for some of their players that are scoring a lot of goals are pretty high. Like David Perron 12.6. So it's not crazy high, but it is just it's about his career average. So he's all right. But then you've got Ryan O'Reilly shooting 18.6%. Mike Hoffman at 15%. He's normally at 12%. Braden Shen, 14.2. Jordan Kyrou, 14.3. Tyler Bozak, 14.3. Zach Sanford, who scored 10 goals, 14.9. Sammy Blaze, 25.8%. I mean, these guys are shooting way over what they normally shoot. Like Ryan O'Reilly, 18.6. He's a career 11% shooter. So,
yeah. But what I will say though, to Colorado's side of that, they're kind of in the same boat. You look at Mikko Rantanen, 30 goals, he's shooting at 17. Burakovsky, 19 goals at 18.6%, and then even Brandon Saad with 15 goals, he's at 22.1%.
Yeah.
So again,
that's very high.
I think, a lot of these guys, again, shooting higher than they normally do. So,
and I wonder if that's some of you're playing against like quite a few times. You're playing against these bad teams and these really good teams.
Yeah.
Obviously, like LA, you play them so many times. They've figured them out and they figured out how to score against them, and so then they just do that. Whereas when you're only playing teams 4 or 5 times, it's a lot harder to rely on that. Oh, we know them. We've seen them 2 other times, as opposed to, we know them. We've seen them 8 times. Right. So I'm sure that plays a factor maybe into some elevated shooting percentages, but at the same time there, Justin, Nathan MacKinnon only scored 20 goals. He only shot I guess he's only a career 10% shooter, but he only shot 9.7%. But over the last 3 seasons, he's 13.7, 11.2, and 11%. So he's definitely shot better the last 3 years, where he scored his 39, 41, and 35 goals over the previous 4, where he was under 10% and only had a couple 20-goal seasons. We scored 14 goals one year. Like he just wasn't the goal scorer that he is, of course, now, or really the player that he is now. And I think for the playoffs, it's a different monster anyways. But do you think Ryan O'Reilly can shut down Nathan MacKinnon? I mean, that's really the biggest question mark. If you can shut that line down, you do have a chance against this Colorado team. Like, who would I rather beat me? That MacKinnon and Rantanen, or am I looking towards, I'll take trying to let Nazem Kadri and Brendan Saad and Nichushkin and JT Compher. If those guys can beat me, then okay, fair enough. That's their depth. But if you can slow down their big boys, you maybe have a chance. That's probably the only way that St. Louis is going to win this series.
Yeah, that's a fairly good question. I think really there's no shutting down that line. I think MacKinnon and Rantanen are just too fast, too good. But to me, the question is going to be, can you minimize the amount of chances you give these guys, right? I think, and the same is said, watching last night, again, the Boston-Washington series, Washington did a good job of minimizing the amount of chances, Marchand and Pasternak got early on. And, to me, Boston's second line with Taylor Hall stood out as, the team that, or the line that was really having more impact. And so for Colorado, I think obviously MacKinnon and Rantanen are going to get their chances. They're going to, capitalize a few times. But, it's those other second line guys, Kadri, Brandon Saad, Nichushkin. Can those guys step up and produce when, maybe MacKinnon and Rantanen are really being held in check for most of the game? Because we know, again, I think, you're going to see Ryan O'Reilly match up against them as much as possible. But, obviously the speed is going to take over at some point, and, MacKinnon and Rantanen will get their chances. Can they capitalize on those? And can the depth of Colorado's forward group step up to maybe fill in that gap that's going to be, shut down by that defensiveness of Ryan O'Reilly?
Yeah. And I mean, I guess when all is said and done, does this whole series come down to goaltending? Once again, like, there is a possibility that, it's going to be Grubauer versus Binnington. And Binnington has proven that he can steal a series. I mean, he can steal multiple series. But last year, he really struggled in the playoffs. I mean, he was 0-5-0, 4.72 goals against, 8.51 save percentage. So, I mean, he's going to need to have a much better playoff series or playoffs than he did last year. Can Binnington steal this series? That's really probably you can go up and down the lineup for the St. Louis Blues, but if Jordan Binnington has even just an okay or an average series, I don't think the Blues have a chance.
Yeah, I got to agree with you because I think, again, it's going to come down to which team is going to play their game more. And so for St. Louis, it's kind of shut you down, play defensive hockey, use the body and really wear you out, whereas Colorado is going to try to beat you with speed and scoring. So, again, it's shown during the regular season that if Grubauer's, on his game a little bit and they get some scoring, it's going to be tough for teams to win. So, like you said early, I think, if this comes down to a firefight where, St. Louis has got to try to put up 4 or 5 goals, it's going to be over for them real quick.
Yeah, it's going to be hard. Yeah, Colorado has they have scored at least 6 goals in a playoff game 5 times since 2018. Only the Bruins have more. They have 6 in that span. And Colorado hasn't. It's not like Colorado's going super deep in the playoffs over the last 3 years. So they're scoring a lot of goals in very few playoff games. And like I said, I think that's going to happen. I think we're almost guaranteed one game in this series where they kind of go ham. So to me, it's that game. That game is the game that kind of sets the Avalanche apart. And I'll kind of just go ahead and give my prediction here in this series. I think that, based off of a one beast of a scoring game and then probably just being able to outscore the Blues in other games and Binnington probably breaking down at some point. I'm looking at Colorado in 6. I think that the Blues do have a lot of experience and heart. I think they'll make it close in the beginning. I think we might be looking at a 2-2 series headed into a best of 3, and I think that Colorado probably takes a couple in a row over the Blues and ultimately finishes them out.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. Colorado in 6. Honestly, for me, though, it comes down to, St. Louis obviously doesn't have their top point getter with Perron being out on COVID protocol, and Tarasenko not really looking like Tarasenko, right? So,
who hasn't really looked like Tarasenko in like 2 or 3 years,
right? And so, if Binnington is just above average, it's going to be a short series. But ultimately, I think it's Colorado in 6.
Yep, absolutely. And we'll see though. We'll see if Ryan O'Reilly can muster some level of just bring back 2019 Ryan O'Reilly and have him just go ham in these playoffs. And it would be fun if this series went to 7 games because Colorado has such high expectations. I mean, it's anytime the low seed takes the big dog to that game 7 and anything can happen, it's always a thrilling thing. But I don't see it stretching to 7 games. I think Colorado will finish it off in 6, and so do you. Okay, let's go to the other Honda West division matchup, the Vegas Golden Knights and the Minnesota Wild. This series is probably, out of any of these series that happen, is there one that is like less expected than this one? Nobody expected Minnesota to be this good. I think when you look top to bottom on all the other teams that made the playoffs, who's the next least likely team that we kind of thought, well, I don't think they'll make the playoffs? Probably Nashville. But at the same time, I don't think we're that surprised that Nashville made the playoffs based on what else is in this division. Maybe we didn't expect Nashville and Florida to both make the playoffs, but I don't think that you look and you go, oh, there's one of those 2 teams wouldn't make the playoffs. I think you kind of knew Chicago, Detroit, and Columbus weren't going to make the playoffs. So you knew kind of one of those 2 teams would make it. You thought Dallas would be in there, but I don't think that it's a huge shock. But for me, Minnesota being where they are and making the playoffs, I figured that they would probably be 6th in this division, and they of course finished 3rd. So Minnesota and Vegas. What are your initial thoughts here as we preview the series?
Yeah, I'm with you there. They were quite a shock to me as far as, or a surprise anyways. as far as making the playoffs, because you looked at this team, in the preseason, and I think both you and I making our predictions for the playoffs early on, we thought, okay, Minnesota probably won't make it. They'll be a bubble team, but they're probably on the outside looking up. I mean, this was a team that was aging with, veterans like, Eric Stahl there having just recently left, and Zach Parise, Ryan Suter, guys that, are on the downside, as far as, their peak goes. And so, for some reason, man, this sensational rookie, Kirill the Thrill Kaprizov, steps in and only manages to lead the team in scoring and points. And I mean, he just makes this Minnesota team fun to watch again. And I think not only that, but then they got some really good goaltending from Cam Talbot, surprisingly, because, again, preseason, I was kind of up in the air about who would be the number one guy, right? Kokkonen last year looked like a pretty decent option for them moving forward, as they had gotten rid of Devin Dubnyk and he had gone off to San Jose. And, again, Cam Talbot, he had been a starter before, but kind of had some rougher years in terms of, Calgary and Edmonton. And so we thought, okay, is this a guy who can step in and be a number one again? And, he looked pretty good. And so, with this team as a whole, without a true number one center either, gosh, man, it was an interesting ride, and seeing guys again like Max Zuccarello, Marcus Foligno step up that maybe just weren't as dominant as before. And it seemed like, a Calgary team a few years ago where these guys were all having, career best years. And they just managed to get in the playoffs here this way.
That's a good point. A lot of guys having career years. And of course, the one wild factor is Kaprizov. I mean, the guy shot 17.2%. That is, I mean, maybe this kid's just a wild shooter, unbelievable, and that continues. That's pretty high, 17%. But yeah, I mean, everything just kind of worked for this team. I mean, even despite some injuries, you had like Zuccarello, he missed 14 games. Marcus Foligno, he missed 17. Zach Parise missed 11 games. I mean, there has been no shortage of some injuries for this team, and yet they have kind of managed to navigate it very well. And of course, they find themselves third seed in a pretty competitive high-end Honda West division, finished with 75 points. And all that to boot, they did really, really well against the Vegas Golden Knights in the regular season. They had a nice regular season matchup against them. So it's probably the one team that Vegas didn't want to play.
Right.
So I mean, and of course playoffs, they're always a different monster, and you're never going to have to look back at the playoff or the regular season and go, oh, well, see who won the season series. I mean, Minnesota was 5-1-2 against the Vegas Golden Knights. Okay, so essentially, 5-3. Vegas is 3-5, but it's all spread out over a regular season, and it's the regular season. Vegas did have kind of some different spots in there where things weren't looking great, and they had to get incredible goaltending to kind of drag them through some stretches. But I think you look at the regular season, and it does have to give you a little bit of concern if you're the Golden Knights to go, okay, this Minnesota team, they know how to play us. And obviously Minnesota, they kind of went from being this slow old team to finding this team speed. I mean, it's funny when they signed Matt Zuccarello to that big deal. What was it? He's making $6 million a year for another 3 years after this year, by the way. But when they did that, and everybody kind of went, "What in the world?" And their GM's trying to come out and, he's an incredible. He's like a water bug out there. He's so fast and kind of pumping his tires. And we're kind of looking at it I mean, we all like Matt Zuccarello. I mean, I don't think anybody would say I don't want Matt Zuccarello on my team, but for the length, the 6x6 that he got, it just did not seem like it was going to be a good deal. And the first year of it really didn't go that well. And, now they trade away some of they lose some of that slow veteran presence, and you replace it with obviously a Kirill Kaprizov, but last year at the deadline they bring in Kevin Fiala, they bring in Matt Zuccarello a couple years ago at free agency, and some of their younger players are moving up the lineup. All of a sudden this team is faster than maybe they ever have been. And this may be the first year where you can say the Minnesota Wild have kind of caught up with the rest of the league in terms of speed winning.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you as far as the speed goes. Right, they seem to magically get. I mean, Zuccarello always been fast.
Sure, yeah, and that's what. Yeah, and to that point, Zuccarello almost brought in with a bunch of slow players, like a team that was slower. And he didn't look great. And then all of a sudden the team speeds up, and lo and behold, Zuccarello, I mean, he has a 35-point season in 42 games. That's a 70-point season almost in a 82-game season. So I mean, he had a really nice year, and I think that you're probably pretty pleased with the way that he's worked out.
Yeah, and same said about guys like Kevin Fiala, Jordan Greenway, Joel Eriksson. These guys are speedy guys, right? And so if you look now at their depth chart and the way they're playing minutes, they're giving these speedy guys a little bit more time, unlike, guys like Zach Parise and, your Ryan Hartmans, who maybe aren't as fast as some of these younger guys. But, hey, I mean, you got to adapt sometimes. And I think Minnesota's still able to play, that speed game, but also still play to their identity, which I think is still kind of a little bit defensive, right? So they still want to go out and try to play a smart hockey and play well on both ends of the ice. So, again, we'll see what kind of Minnesota team we get in the playoffs. Now, to Vegas's point, this is a team that has plenty of experience as far as what it takes to win in the playoffs. So, that's going to be the difference for me. Not only that, too, but, I love Vegas's depth as far as up front, on the forward group goes, and even on the back end, really. I think, you could probably match as far as depth in terms of defensemen goes on both of these teams. But to me, the depth up front and forward is really going to be the key when the series, comes down to it. I think, obviously there's, Fiala and Kaprizov and Zuccarello. Those guys are great, but can they match up in terms of, all this depth up front that, Vegas has? I mean, they have, in my opinion, maybe, the defensive forward front runner and Mark Stone, Pacioretty, who, again, these are 20-plus goal scorers, this year, typically 30 goal scorers. Marcia Show, Carlson, Alex Tuck, they got a bunch of heavy hitters up front.
Yeah, I mean, and like Chandler Stevenson had a career year, 14 goals in the 51 games. Alex Tuck, 18 goals. I mean, Alex Martinez had a fantastic year on the back end. They got so much production up and down. And you know what? The side note is Alex Pietrangelo, the guy they brought in to be their number one defenseman. He missed 15 games. He also didn't look as good as I think we all know he can be. And that is scary. If he can elevate his game come playoff time, which we know he absolutely does. He's got a Stanley Cup on his resume. He scored a Stanley Cup winning goal. Like, this guy knows clutch. And if they can get an Alex Pietrangelo that is that 2019 playoff run, Alex Pietrangelo, this team is going to get a massive, massive boost.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you. And I mean, look, you've also got Alex Martinez. He's in a contract year, so he's looking to make a statement. I think he did so in the regular season, looked very, very good playing alongside Shea Theodore for a lot of minutes. And, Pietrangelo, again, a guy who, playing 25 minutes a night, he's still going to be out there for mostly every other shift. And the production just wasn't there in terms of what we're used to seeing, right? And, maybe that has something to do with the fact that, this Vegas team has a little bit more depth on defense than maybe St. Louis did at the time, as far as guys capable of putting up offense. So, what are we going to see out of him? And like you said, if we see that, that Alex of old, this is going to be a long series for Minnesota, or maybe just a short one. So
that's true. Now, here's one thing about this Vegas team. I think when you just you look at the names on Vegas, Mark Stone, Max Pacioretty, Marcia So. We've seen these guys. We've seen them make playoff runs. We've seen them their tires pumped quite a bit. I mean, of course, that first playoff run that they went on, that just kind of solidified a lot of these guys in history, basically, because of that team. And you got Marc-Andre Fleury, and there are so many household names on this Vegas team. And when you go over to Minnesota, even their top scorer, there's every reason for many people coming into watching this series to have never seen Kirill Kaprizov play a game. Just an average fan isn't necessarily going out of their way to watch a bunch of Minnesota Wild games. That's just Minnesota, as it wasn't on national TV very many times. So, you go top to bottom. Fiala, Zuccarello, Eriksson. These aren't guys who, if you go rattle off some people who are casual hockey fans, not everybody's going to know those guys. But casual hockey fans, they're going to have heard of Marcia So if they watch the playoffs or anything. Like, this Vegas team got a lot of hype. Even when ESPN didn't want anything to do with hockey, they were talking about this Vegas team because you had to. They forced you to the year they went on that run. So I wonder if some of the reason that we look at this Vegas team and go, wow, they're so much better than that Minnesota team, is because even we, as people that watch hockey very regularly and immerse ourselves in it, we recognize these names. Like, the name recognition on this team is much higher than Minnesota, and so it's very natural to just go, well, they're a better team because look at all the really good players they have. When Minnesota has some excellent puck movers, they can do so many things well, and the players on their team just haven't had the opportunity to get their names out there by going on a playoff run, because they really haven't been in a significant playoff position in a while. And so I think that this Minnesota team is going to surprise people. It's going to be hard for them to win this series because Vegas is just stacked. But I think at the end of this series, everyone's going to know who Kaprizov is. That is one thing I am sure of. Yes.
I will not disagree with you there at all. However, right, one thing we haven't really talked about at all, the goaltending, right? I look at Vegas and I feel bad for Minnesota this year because, again, this is a team that really didn't go and put up 6, 7, 5 goal games too often this year, but Vegas is very capable of that. But their goaltending, right? Marc-Andre Fleury, again, playing like he has a chip on his shoulder because they signed Leonard last year to this extension, and you think Andre Fleury's out the door, and here we go again. He's just putting up just a career numbers, and with that experience, this guy,
he might win the Vezina.
Yeah, he absolutely could, and he looks like he's going to probably steal a series or two the way he's playing for the Vegas Golden Knights. So Minnesota could be in some deep water already. Just having to see him already. So. Best of luck to them because I'm with you. I don't think Minnesota is going to fare very well against Vegas in this series, and Marc-Andre is going to be a big reason why.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. And of course, if anything happens to Marc-Andre Fleury, nobody is batting an eye to having to play Robin Leonard, who has only gone 13-4-2 this year. They just rode the hot hand. Marc-Andre Fleury stole that net back, and he never gave it back. I think this is the first time in his career that he had less than a 2-point goals against, if I'm not mistaken. So,
yeah, and you know what? It's kind of unfair too because you look at this offseason in July. I think it's July 21st. It's going to be the expansion draft for Seattle. Vegas is protected. They don't have to give up a player to Seattle because of the expansion rules, right? Which just kind of seems unfair, as talented as deep as they are. That they don't have to go through that. But again, Marc-Andre doesn't have to worry about getting, snatched up as far as being protected or unprotected goes. But, we still might see a trade there as far as Seattle looking to get themselves a quality goaltender. But
other thing is that, you look at what they're going to need to do in terms of re-signing guys. I mean, they don't really have a whole lot. I mean, Alec Martinez is really the only player that they're going to need to re-sign, which I don't know if that'll be in the cards for them. But and like Thomas Nosek, there's nothing huge that has to happen. They don't have much cap space, but they could trade a goalie. But they could also go, you know what? We got one more year with Fleury and Leonard in a full 82-game season to be able to play one goalie 50 times and the other goalie 32 or, closer to 45, 37 kind of thing. I don't think you're mad. I mean, Fleury's going to be 37 next year. To only have to play him much fewer times, even keeping his games above 50, to know you've got Rob and Leonard right there, I don't think it's a problem. No. Keeping both these guys. Plus, they both have some level of a no trade. I guess Leonard's got an 8-team no trade, and of course, and Fleury's got a 10-team no trade. So, I'm sure they could find a team willing to take on those guys' services. But I guess it would be more likely that Fleury then, with 1 year left at $7 million, could get dealt if that's the route that they wanted to go. But if Vegas goes and wins the cup, there's no way they're getting rid of Fleury. Not a chance. Especially if Fleury's the one that wins them the cup. Not a chance would they get rid of him.
Exactly. And you know what? The one, as far as, needs for this team, maybe in the offseason they might want to address is a top 6 centerman, because obviously Carlson's great, but Chandler Stevenson, is he going to be, your number 1 center moving forward? Probably not. He's better slotted, I think, as a third-line center for this team. But still, I mean, if you can move Marc-Andre Fleury to create that cap space or get some capital to bring in a guy, not only that too, but, is Cody Glass going to, eventually grow into that position? Who knows? But, I think that's really the only way this team looks to get rid of Marc-Andre Fleury, is if they really think hey, we got to do something about that, a top 2 centerman. And so, you can move him to clear that cap space. But other than that, if that's not, a concern of theirs, or if they don't really think they can acquire a guy, keep Fleury and then play both these guys all next season.
Sure. I mean, Marc-Andre Fleury he's already a Hall of Fame goaltender. He's 3rd all time in wins, which he surpassed Roberto Luongo and Ed Belfour this year. I think he passes Patrick Waugh ultimately. He's 59 games behind Patrick Waugh. I don't know that he passes Brodeur, who he's 199 wins behind Brodeur. That would be tough to do at 37.
Yeah, he'd have to play into his mid-40s to do that.
But if I guess the same could be said about Brodeur. If there weren't for all these work stoppages, they'd probably have more. Like if with Brodeur, if it weren't for 2 of those work stoppages that he experienced, he might have 750 wins. Maybe more.
Yeah. Well, I will say we're no longer in the age of goaltenders playing 70 games a season either. So
that's true. Yeah. Whereas Fleury was getting that treatment earlier in his career. Yeah. Well, I think that it is that time where we need to make our predictions for this series. We actually, I don't even think we've mentioned the word Shea Weber yet. Or sorry, Shea Theodore, not Shea Weber, Shea Theodore. And he's, might be the best player in this entire series. And
he very well could be.
At very least, maybe the most important, because of what he does when he's on the ice. He's been fantastic this year. He very well could be one of the nominees for the Norris Trophy. 42 points in the 53 games, but beyond that, he's just been so important. I mean, in last year's playoffs, 19 points in 20 games. The year before that, 8 points in 7 games in the playoffs. I mean, this guy shows up in the playoffs, and he is going to be so important for this Vegas team. And I think ultimately he's the X factor. Like Minnesota, well, they have a really great top 4. I mean, Jared Spurgeon, Jonas Brodin, Ryan Suter, and Matt Dumba, of course, a very good top 4. Solid top to bottom. I mean, even into their top 6. I mean, Ian Cole in your top 6, nothing to shy away from. But they don't have a Pietrangelo. They don't have the Shea Theodore. Like, they don't have this super high-end defenseman, and really, even they've got Vegas has two of them, and then Vegas also has Alec Martinez, and I think that ultimately that's probably what puts them over the top. Now, Vegas doesn't have the same depth on defense, so if anybody goes down, that's advantage Minnesota, because Minnesota has some guys that you can slide upwards, but I think in terms of those high-end guys, those guys that are going to play 30 minutes a night in the playoffs, I mean, you're practically going to have Theodore or Pietrangelo or Martinez on the ice at all times, and that's potentially scary for Minnesota. So where do you go prediction-wise for this series? Who are you betting on?
Yeah, I think Kirill the Thrill is going to be great to see. I think he's going to make his national television debut. As far as, like, you're going to start talking about this guy moving forward. He's going to be a household name for everybody who doesn't watch Minnesota hockey on the regular. But to me, I think ultimately the depth up front, the depth at the goaltending position for Vegas is going to win it for him. And I see Vegas making a short one here in 5 games. Okay.
I'm going to I'm going to say that, I look top to bottom at all of our predictions. For the most part, we don't really have any upsets. So I think this is the time for an upset. As much as I like Vegas, and I think I agree they're heavy favorites, but I think that this is a special year for Minnesota, much like that year was very special for the Vegas Golden Knights their first year, coming in with no expectations, and you've got guys having career years. Everything's coming together. The coaching staff is gelling well with players. You've got a beautiful mix of veterans and youngsters, and I think that this is Minnesota's series. I think 7 games, and they're going to walk away with shocking the Vegas Golden Knights here in the first round and moving on to round number 2 to take on the Colorado Avalanche in the second round. So that's I got to go bold. And pick the Minnesota Wild. I think there's something just going on. Sometimes you just get that year where that first round is so weird, and there's always that one series where you go, what the frick? How did this team lose? And
this could be that Tampa Bay Columbus, series from a couple years ago.
Yeah, that's.
And I'll tell you what, if Talbot, is hot, if Kirill the Thrill and those young group of forwards up front for Minnesota are having a good series. I mean, they've got enough good players to really pull this off. And a few of the guys up front for Vegas, like Stone or Pacioretty and Wild Bill, if they're just not on their game, I mean, this could easily go Minnesota's way, because again, we talk about a team that's just totally under the radar, totally unexpected, a surprise team for this playoff, and that would be Minnesota. And so why not make them the surprise team for the first round?
Here's the other beautiful thing. This Minnesota team next year has $21 million in cap space. Here's the players that are going to be free agents. Marcus Johansson, no big deal. You can replace a Johansson. Nick Bonino, Kevin Fiala is an RFA. They'll of course give him some good money. Nick Bjugstad is a UFA, and Ian Cole. So they're not going to lose, and they're not going to have to pay out a whole lot other than to Fiala. And this team is pretty set up to be able to go out and potentially bring in some free agents and improve themselves. So whether they win the series or not, this Minnesota team is a team on the rise, and I'm going to be rooting for them. I'm going to be rooting for Alex Ovechkin to head to Minnesota. How about that? Just kidding. That's,
I will say, I was listening to TSN, last week, and of course all that drama with Jack Eichel, and they actually, the guys at TSN were saying there's 2 teams that could really use him that he's likely to go to, and that's the Rangers of Minnesota. And you talk about cap space, right? They've got it to do it, because obviously Fiala, Joel Eriksson Ek, they'll get these guys extended, and it won't cost them too much more. But how perfect would that be if you had, Eichel as your top line guy playing with Kirill the Thrill, and you had Joel Eriksson Ek as your second line center? I think they would be set up for a long time to be a competitive team moving forward.
Yeah, how could you say no to that if you're Jack Eichel?
Yeah, and then not only that, but they've got 2 first-round picks this year. So maybe if you're Minnesota, you're like, hey, you know what? These are going to be late first-rounders, hoping that they go, at least a round or 2 in the playoffs here. And so, why not give both those up to try to make a deal to bring in a guy like, Jack Eichel? I know I certainly would.
Yeah, isn't it funny? You trade away Jason Zucker and you get that first round pick. I mean, I know they also got like Galchenyuk, but that first round pick, I mean, man, it's Jason Zucker hasn't done a ton for the Penguins, and what could that first round pick do? I know they'll be rooting for an early Penguins exit so that they can have that pick be in the top 25. So, okay, let's do this real quick before we sign off. Justin, I want to get your Stanley Cup playoff final winner prediction. I want to know who you think is going to win the cup. That's a lot easier way of saying it. Ultimately, these playoffs, and who is lifting Lord Stanley's goblet?
Yeah, you know what? I think obviously we talked about it for a quick minute about the President's Trophy winners. Obviously not being the odds-on favorite to win the cup every year, the way it's gone. But, obviously I think Colorado, Tampa Bay would be an easy pick as far as predicting the Stanley Cup Finals. But for me, I think I'm going to kind of go a little off the board here, and I think there's going to be a couple wild cards. Maybe not necessarily wild cards, but listen, NHL 21 predicted Boston to win it all. I'm not going that route just because I'm not a fan of their team, although I did pick them to beat Washington. But for me, ultimately, I think it's going to be Vegas and Carolina in the Stanley Cup Finals, and I think that Vegas finally pulls off their first ever Stanley Cup.
Okay. Yeah, it's hard to predict who's going to be in the finals because you actually don't know who will play each other. There's not like a West-East guarantee, right? There's no I don't think that once they go to that Final Four, it's like by points who plays each other, isn't it?
Well, so it's going to be basically, from what I understand, it's supposed to be the Scotia North Division and the Honda West Division on basically what would have been the Western side of things, and then the Discover Central and the East.
Okay, so they do have 2 divisions that are guaranteed to play each other. Okay, I actually didn't.
What I understand,
I didn't actually know that. So, I just conveniently forgot about it. I am in that case. I guess that that helps me there. But that Carolina team is pretty dirty. This is what I think is going to happen because I think that the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to the Stanley Cup Finals. But you know who they're going to have to beat in the Stanley Cup Finals? The Boston Bruins. What an unbelievable Stanley Cup Final that would be if the Leafs' last obstacle is the Boston Bruins.
Wow.
So that's what I'm predicting. And I'm predicting that finally the Leafs break through, they beat the Boston Bruins, and I'm the happiest man on earth for 48 hours. Till I watch the news again.
There you go.
All right, there's our Stanley Cup final prediction. Let us know what you think. Let us know your predictions for the Stanley Cup playoffs and beyond. And we'll talk to you guys soon. Have a good one.